Hello and welcome to the What's for Dinner show. My name's Lynn and my aim, along with my guests, is to explore how our food experiences have influenced our lives as well as our waistlines. My guest this week is Alison Bladh, who is a nutritional therapist born and raised in the UK but now living in Sweden. Alison is a specialist in helping women to minimise, manage and mitigate the often challenging symptoms of the menopause through changes to diet and to lifestyle. I know that this is a topic of great interest to, well, let's face it, all women, as it seems that sometimes just saying the word menopause can cause a hot flush and a panic attack. Welcome to the What's for Dinner show, Alison. Perhaps we should begin by explaining exactly what the menopause is.
We all assume, people assume that everyone understands what the menopause is. But there's so many, I see with my clients that there's so many women that don't really understand because it isn't something that we talk about enough, really. And when we think of the menopause, it actually comes in 3 different stages. The first stage is what we call perimenopause. And perimenopause, on average, obviously it can vary considerably depending on the woman, but on average it starts at the age of 45. And perimenopause really is where it's a bit like a hormone roller coaster. 1 month your estrogen can be up and your progesterone can be down. It's all over the place. And that in itself, that's when you can start feeling the classical menopausal symptoms, like hot flushes. You can start gaining weight, irritability, mood swings, all those real tiredness, total lack of energy. And this goes on roughly, again, it's very varied, to the age of 51. And what happens then is you actually go into what we call menopause. And menopause is when you haven't ovulated, so when you haven't had a period for a year. And then you can actually say, now I am in menopause. And what that means basically is that you're not ovulating anymore, you're not producing any more eggs, and you're not fertile anymore. And then all the time after menopause, you go into what we call postmenopause. And postmenopause is the state that you will be in for the rest of your life. And women are living, well, we're all living much longer than we used to. So that can be another 30 years of your life. But in postmenopause, you're not producing, you're not ovulating, you're not producing any eggs. So, your estrogen levels and hormone levels are very low. Your body does produce estrogen from other areas of the body, but, the levels are low. And that's when, you have to start looking at other areas of health to support yourself, because estrogen is so important for all aspects of bodily health. So, there's different things that you need to do really through the different, what we call the menopause transition.
So are you finding then that women who sort of come to you for advice, that they do lack a clear understanding of how the menopause or perimenopause is affecting their bodies?
The majority of people that come to me are stressed, overwhelmed, feeling terrible. They've started with the menopausal symptoms, the tiredness, the aching, the irritability, but they don't always understand it's menopause because, life in general can be very stressful, can't it? And a lot of midlife women, they've got a career, they've got children at home, they're looking after the family. They are quite stressed and overwhelmed, and they put the symptoms down to their life rather than that it's perimenopause. They don't think about that. And when you say to them, have you thought that this actually could be perimenopause? The majority of people say, no, it can't be that. I can't be, because I think it's associated with age, isn't it? And oh no, menopause, perimenopause, I'm not. That can't be me. But it can start as early as the age of 40. So, in answer to your question, yes, I do. I think a lot of women don't truly understand what it actually is and what happens to the body.
No, because I don't think I'd even heard the phrase perimenopause until a friend of mine mentioned it. And I was like, well, what's that then? And thinking that it was something that was more into your late 50s, sort of 60s, really. Quite a big shock as well that it has such a wide range of impacts on your physical and mental health,
Yeah, but it
really.
really does. Estrogen is it's a master hormone. We have estrogen receptors all over our body. So, it's needed for virtually every bodily system to work as it should. So, when the levels start to decline and eventually, you stop producing estrogen from your ovaries, it affects so many things. I think people don't really understand or realize how important estrogen is for our overall health.
Does it stem from a sort of a more general lack of understanding about how what we eat affects our bodies? Because I think we just get so bound up with thinking about what we eat in relation to our weight rather than the more general sense of well-being that it relies also on our diet.
Yeah, great point, Lynn. I mean, that's so important. It doesn't have to be complicated. We
Mm.
should eat nourishing foods. Choose not to eat all the highly refined processed foods and eat foods that nourish your body. It's not that complicated. We weren't made to eat processed foods, and foods like that have no nutritional value. The food environment is become very toxic. That it's difficult. I understand when people are busy and stressed that it's easier just to grab the pre-packed foods, but I mean it doesn't nourish your body.
Yeah, it doesn't have the range of vitamins and minerals and nutrients that we need. And I think we're just so focused on volume of what we eat and like you say, the ease and the speed with which we can create something to eat. We kind of are forgetting really that, everything that goes in affects how we feel, how we look and how our bodies function, ultimately how we weather the sort of storms of the cycle of life, really. Do you yourself come from a family of healthy eaters?
Well, I was lucky enough to be brought up on a farm in the south of England. And I, even from a very young age, I remember, being outside in nature. And my mother was a professional chef as well, and she used to grow all her own vegetables and fruits. We had a lovely fruit trees. So from a very young age, I was in the kitchen, watching her cook and helping her cook. And so I think, I was very privileged to grow up in that sort of environment because it taught me how to cook for one and gave me that real love of food. So I mean I've never really been subjected so much to refined foods because I just cooked from whole base foods. But I think that it was to do with my mother as well because she always used raw ingredients to make things. And it's so interesting as well in research because there's so much research coming out now about the gut microbiome, the gut bacteria, and how wonderful it is for children that grow up in that sort of environment. Because I was out running around with the pigs and the donkeys and in mud and everything, but that gives you such a diverse microbiome, all the different bacteria that you get in, and also from the homegrown foods and everything. But I think people and children in general now don't
Mm.
have that diversity of gut bacteria because we're super clean, aren't we now?
Yeah, yeah, it's a more sterile kind of environment, isn't it? Especially over the recent years with all the anti-COVID spraying and hand washing and everything, which obviously has been very important, but at the same time, it mitigates against our sort of involvement with the bugs and the germs that we need to keep our bodies resistant, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, so important, the gut bacteria. I
Mm.
mean, talking about menopause and perimenopause, when estrogen levels decline, it starts to infect the integrity of the gut. So, it's even more important that you start thinking about eating, what we call probiotic foods, which are the fermented foods that have the wonderful gut bugs in, the bacteria, like sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, fermented vegetables.
Mm.
So beneficial for health.
It's Tim Spector, isn't it? I think
Yeah.
who is sort of one of the gut advocates. And I love the way that he talks about French food and how gooier and the stickier the brie is, the more microbes there are in it, and you ought to eat plenty of it, and that the French know a thing or two about how to keep the gut healthy.
It really is. I mean, it all starts in the gut. And I see that so much with, my clients, that if you work on gut health, it affects everything from your mood to your skin health to, it's everything. It's so important that we look after our gut bacteria and our digestion.
So when you were, growing up on the farm, then what would a typical mealtime have been like for you when you were growing up?
Yeah, one thing that I think now living in Sweden as well, one thing that I really remember that my mother was just so good at was a roast dinner. And even now, when I think sometimes I really crave a nice roast dinner because they don't really eat roast dinners in Sweden. It's not such a big thing over here. But she was just so, everything was so wholesome and tasty. You'd have a nice roast chicken, and then you'd have like roast potatoes, and then Brussels sprouts. I remember we ate a lot of, and carrots, and with a lovely gravy. It was delicious. And maybe what are they called that you have with that made from batter?
Oh, Yorkshire puddings.
Yorkshire puddings, yes.
Well, I mean, that's about the only sort of upside of the time of year that we're about to embark on, that it sort of becomes roast dinner season in my mind.
It's nothing nicer than a proper roast dinner. I really miss that actually. But that I think that's what I remember most from growing up with my mum.
Yeah, and so would you have had a fancy sort of dessert on a Sunday with your roast dinner?
What another thing that my mother was amazing at. She used to make this chocolate pavlova. So I remember always saying to her, "Oh, can't you make the?" I don't know what she did to it, but it was just perfect, and it was yeah, roast dinner with chocolate pavlova. What more can you ask for?
So going to school then, did you go to a sort of a small sort of rural school?
I actually went to boarding school from the age of 7. 7 years old is quite young, really, isn't it, to go to boarding school? And it was very, very strict. Food was fine, but it was, your normal fish fingers and mashed potato. Maybe on the weekend you get bacon, lots of toast, I remember, and Marmite. And the one thing that I really remember about that, which I find quite fascinating now, working as a nutritional therapist, that sugar, totally not allowed. They were really strict about how many sweets you could eat. And they had in the pantry, I remember they had a cupboard quite high up that was always locked. And in that they had, the big jars that you used to get like in sweet shops with like bonbons and things. And then at the weekends, that the matron, who was quite scary, used to get this big jar of strawberry bonbons out and hand them out to all. We'd be sat at the table. We'd get one of these strawberry bonbons on a Saturday and a Sunday.
What, just one?
Just one, yeah, one. That was it. If it's such a drastic change if you think how it is now for 7-year-old children, the amount of sugar that's in our diet and everything. But the thing is, because I didn't really eat any sugar, I didn't miss it. It wasn't a big deal, really.
No, I guess your sort of palate just wouldn't have craved it. I mean, I think that's sort of, well, how we understand now it kind of works. The more you have, the more your body sort of switches on to wanting more.
Yeah, I mean, sugar is addictive, and sugar has no nutritional value. We don't need to eat sweets, and there's no nutrition at all in sugar, and it is addictive. It's been shown in studies, that they've done on rats, that they prefer. There was one study in particular where the rats preferred to eat the sugar to have it. They had cocaine and they had sugar,
Wow, yeah,
and the sugar
yeah.
was more addictive.
Scary. What was your sort of most hated boarding school meal that you can remember?
They used to do tapioca. I remember they did tapioca that was not, they hadn't really made it very properly. It was all lumpy and cold, and then it had that like a bit of a skin over the top, a bit like semolina as well. It was, and I do actually like semolina, but it was the way they made it. It was not pleasant. But apart from that, I don't really have any foods that I actually dislike. I mean, there's some maybe that I wouldn't choose that aren't my favourite, but there isn't really anything that I absolutely detest.
So what do you think prompted you to sort of go into nutritional therapy career? Was it something that you were always sort of set on?
I think it was actually my destiny because I've always had a huge love of food. I mean, I am extremely passionate about cooking. And, as I was saying, that my mother was a professional chef. So, I was in the kitchen as soon as I could, just making things and experimenting. That went, into another level when I got old, in my teenage years. I actually developed acne. I had quite bad skin when I was a teenager. And it started to get me thinking about, is this to do with something I'm eating? Why is this happening to my skin? And that led me into, the interest in hormones, puberty. I actually initially worked as an esthetician, so as a beauty therapist, specifically working with ladies that had perimenopausal, menopausal skin problems, because that's all hormonal based because of the lack of estrogen. And I very soon started to realize that, you have to look at what's going on in the inside. It's not just the outside. And that's when I went back and studied to be a nutritional therapist, studying nutritional science, really. So I think it was destined, because I've always loved food, loved cooking, and always been very interested, even from a young age, in, if I eat that, what's in that? What are the nutrients? What are the minerals? How is that going to benefit me? I think it's a combination of growing up and suffering from acne and wanting to know how food could help me, which I did do, and it did really help with my lifestyle, and food really helped my skin, and also, my mother, her love of food and cooking. So I think it was a combination, really.
So how do you think, the medical profession's attitude to diet and the impact of diet on our health, has that changed, do you think, over the sort of course of your career?
Yeah, I mean, nutritional science, the nutritional world, it changes all the time because of the research that's coming out. I mean, it's fantastic that there needs to be more research done in certain areas, but there is always research
Mm.
coming out about food and, what we should eat, and it changes all the time. So, I've seen when I started, fat was no, no, we shouldn't eat fat. Fat is terrible. Well, everything was low fat, high carbohydrate. And now we're seeing that actually wasn't very good advice, because there's an obesity epidemic worldwide, and fat
Mm.
isn't bad for you. Okay, the sort of fat you eat is very important, but we need fat. That's really, really crucial. So I think that there's many changes that I have seen. I think, we're living in a society where there's so much temptation out there with all these highly processed, refined, that they have people that basically just work in laboratories and research that perfect, like they call, like the sweet
Mm.
spot of fat, sugar. So we become addicted to all these processed foods because they obviously want us to buy them, but it is being very detrimental to our health. So I really do feel that there's a lot more that could be done to improve the health of society. And a lot of the big food giants aren't really helping, to improve the nation's health. That they're more concentrated on how much money they can make.
Yeah, so there's like a commercially driven
Mm.
imperative for us to not eat healthier. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So
because I mean, it's when you go into a supermarket, you should just go round the outside, because round the outside, you've got the vegetables, the fruits, the meats. As soon as you go into like the middle aisles, that's when you're like just bombarded with all the crisp biscuits, chocolate.
yeah,
So
just go
just go
around the
round the outside.
outside. That's a very yes. I'm visualizing my local supermarket now, and I'm thinking you're right, because you go in. There's the fruit and the veg. There's the fish. There's the meat. Round the back, down the other side for some toiletries, and out the door.
'Cause I remember my grandmother, she grew up in the Second World War, and she didn't really eat anything that was sugary, because she didn't grow up with sugar. She one thing she did, this always fascinates me, and I wish that I'd asked her more about this. So she always used to have for breakfast an avocado. She cut an avocado. She used to call it an avocado pear, and she'd have in it some olive oil, and then she'd have some sort of bran cereal, and then that was just like the most healthiest breakfast. But when I was a kid, I didn't realise. I just thought, "Oh, how weird is that? What's she doing?"
It's a very strange thing to do, like you say, but it's full of a lot of nutrients and fats that you need to get through the day.
Yeah, I mean, she lived till she was
Yeah.
97, so she's obviously doing something
Yeah,
right.
that's it. Obviously, living in Sweden now, if you were to invite me round for Sunday lunch, what might be on the menu?
Yeah, Sweden, I mean, the typical very I mean, everyone always thinks of with
Yeah.
Sweden is the herring. The pickled herring. So this comes in many different marinades. And I can remember when I first moved over here, and I love fish and herring, but I thought, oh, I don't know about that. But now I love it. I really. So a very classic Swedish meal would be, you'd have your herring, you have cheese on the crisp bread. You'd maybe have some eggs, creme fraiche that you have like cream with the herring. But that tends to be more of a summertime meal. If you were to come around in the autumn or the winter, they eat a lot of wild meat in Sweden. I'm very spoilt that we can get hold of like elk and deer and reindeer, which is a lovely meat. And I very much like the fact that it's wild. It hasn't been interfered with or factory farmed or pumped full of antibiotics or anything. So I think probably now, if you came round to dinner now, I'd probably serve or lunch like maybe like venison. And they do something called hasselback potatoes, where it's basically a potato that you just slice do lots of slices through the middle of it, bit like so it looks like there's maybe 10 different slices, and you bake them in the oven, and you put salt and pepper. You can
Mm.
put breadcrumbs over them, and then some oil. They're delicious, very crispy. So that, and then vegetables. I mean, the beans, all the nice green beans are in season here. So, and I've got lots of. I've had some tomatoes growing out on the balcony this year, so I've got hundreds of tomatoes. So I might bake you some tomatoes.
It sounds delicious. I've never actually eaten venison, so that would be a new one for me. Because obviously, I think it's quite a luxury meat in this country.
Yeah, it is, and I mean, venison's it's okay price wise here, but if you're going to be eating like reindeer and elk, then it does get quite expensive. But that's something, I think is for me, it's all about quality. I'd rather eat
Mm.
meat less, but when I do eat meat, I'd rather have a good, quality piece of meat.
Going back to Christmas, then, so do you celebrate Christmas in a sort of traditional English way now that you're in Sweden, or are there other habits that have crept in?
Yeah, in Sweden, Christmas is a really big thing. I always have to have a turkey, but we tend to spread it out. So, in Sweden, Christmas is celebrated on Christmas Eve, and then they have their typical smorgasbord, where you have like, it's a bit like a buffet, where you have a wild selection of everything. And it's very classical. You'd have all your fishes. So you'd have salmon, you'd have the herring, you'd have that with they eat cheese on the crisp bread, and then you'd have some like new potatoes or fresh potatoes. So you'd have that first as kind of a starter, and then you would have like the meat, so
Mm.
the meatballs, very typical Swedish, and then you might have some sausages, and they do it's a bit like a potatoes done in the oven with anchovies. So you slice the potatoes, a bit like a potato gratin. What's that called in Sweden? Janssons frestelse. That's delicious. So they have that with all the meats. And then sweet things wise, they love making their own like sweets. So I've been out sometimes at Christmas to various different restaurants, and it's amazing. They make these most beautiful, little handmade sweets that you tend to eat afterwards for dessert. So that's quite and ham, the meat. They bake a big ham. Turkey isn't such a big thing here, but they would have a ham. But I always insist on having a roast turkey one of the days, and you having stuffing. And the Swedes really don't understand stuffing. It's they don't really like it. They're like, oh, what what's that? A bit
Yeah.
suspicious of it. So, but I make it anyway because I like it. So
So the little sweets then, are they like a sort of a chocolate item or a boiled sweet?
it's a real wide selection from chocolate to like
Mm.
toffees, really beautifully made.
I don't know if you've heard of the Great British Bake Off, have you?
Yes,
You
yes,
have,
yeah.
good. So there's a series on currently, and a couple of weeks ago, they asked the contestants to bake a Swedish smorgastorta. I think that's how you might say it. Is that something that you've eaten?
I have, not very often, to be honest.
Well, yeah. Well, it seemed to be sort of slices of bread. I mean, because it was bread week, so they had to make the bread.
Yeah.
Slices of bread with different kinds of fillings, savoury fillings in between. So I guess, aesthetically, it looks a bit like a layer cake, but it's actually savoury.
Yeah, it's like a huge big sandwich, really. That's
Mm.
the best way to describe it. It's like an almighty sandwich shaped in the cake.
So, have you made one of those yourself, or is that something that you might only have when you're out?
I actually have never made one of those myself, and it's not something I don't actually, to be honest, see that very often
Mm,
when I'm out in restaurants and that. But
mm.
yeah, it is a Swedish thing.
Back to the menopause then. What sort of advice, would you like give people if they are approaching perimenopause and the sorts of steps that they can take to try and, mitigate the more unpleasant sides of that stage of life?
There's many things that you can do, but I think one thing that you have to understand is that you're coming into a time of your life where you have to take better care of yourself. I always like to say you've got the 80-20 rule, that if you do 80% of your life healthily and thinking about what you eat and lifestyle choices, have some wine or eat some chocolate, or but really when you come into menopause, it goes down to like 90-10. And there's a lot of research done on, if you look after yourself and you manage your weight and think about what you're eating, that hopefully your menopausal symptoms won't be as severe. There's a lot of correlation between the amount of weight that you're
Mm,
carrying and hot flushes, for example. So really thinking about eating a balanced diet. The Mediterranean style diet is a diet that always comes up in research as being so beneficial, for everyone, but in particular for menopausal women, because it's really giving you all the healthy fats. You've got no refined processed foods. You've got all, protein like fish and white meat. They don't tend to eat so much red meat. Vegetables, fruits, or
mm,
legumes, nuts and seeds. Basing your meals on these sort of foods, you think, I'm going to choose those sort of foods. I'm not going to choose the foods that aren't good for my body. And nourishing your body, nourishing and hydrating your body is so important. I mean, something as simple as drinking enough water can really make you feel better during perimenopause and menopause. So I think it's just being kind to yourself and choosing not to eat foods that make you feel terrible.
mm. And so, do you think then that the menopause is experienced differently in different sort of cultures and different countries?
Yeah, totally. And this is again been shown in research that different cultures and societies, that in the Western world, we tend to have, majority of women do suffer from some sort of menopausal symptoms and can have a really difficult time during this period. But in different
Mm,
cultures where they maybe don't eat all the refined foods and just eat whole foods, or the foods they've grown, they don't, their menopausal experience and symptoms is way less. And it's also another fascinating thing, I think, in different cultures where menopause is looked upon as, the woman when she's older is looked up to. And it's really respected and thought of as a
mm,
transition in life where you become an elder and you're leading the people. They don't really tend to get any menopausal symptoms. So I mean, it's fascinating. Whereas in the Western society, menopause is, there's a stigma, a little bit of a stigma attached to it. We don't really talk about it. And majority of women in the Western world do really suffer through menopause. So I think it absolutely, in answer to your question, it makes a difference where you come from in the world.
mm. And I guess it's sort of getting the menopause onto a sort of level footing with, the other sort of significant stages of our lives, whether it's puberty or, pregnancy, these are just things that happen to the body and should be completely normalized. And we should understand more about how we manage that process.
I mean, menopause is a total naturally
Mm.
process. It will happen to every woman. in a way we celebrate puberty, don't we? It's a new beginning and it's all very exciting, the beginning of your life, and pregnancy, all these big hormonal events in a woman's life. But menopause is kind of brushed under the carpet, and that's like, oh no, we don't want to talk about that. It's age, isn't it? We're quite an ageism in society, and it's an older woman. We're not fertile anymore. But I mean, that's just ridiculous. I mean, women that have come into postmenopause, we're fantastic. It should be celebrated.
How would you like the understanding of menopause, or the word menopause, to be kind of, reimagined?
But I think it should be. It's the next stage in a woman's life. It should be celebrated for that. We're wiser, we're older, and we're amazing. I don't absolutely do not think that it's a time that we should think, okay, we're older now, let's just scuttle off and not be seen again. It should be celebrated and rejoiced.
And I guess part of that celebration is taking that time and learning and understanding how to look after yourself, so that that postmenopausal period is as long as we can make it be.
In a way, it's a kind of a freedom, because there are many things that are positive to do with menopause. You no more periods, you don't have to worry about getting pregnant anymore. You will have hopefully more time to yourself when if your children are leaving home. You may be retiring. It should be a time in your life you think, wow, now I've got time to do what I want to do finally, and I'm going to go off and do these mad and crazy things that make you feel good.
So it's a new beginning, essentially.
Exactly, new
New
beginning.
beginning.
I think when you look at perimenopause and menopause, it's like a puzzle really. Then you have to have all the things in there, to really get the maximum from your health. And you can top your estrogen levels up with hormone replacement therapy, and also estrogen declines, but also progesterone is another female sex hormone, declines, and eventually your body stops producing that from your ovaries. So it's really those two key hormones, and then obviously you've got testosterone in the background there, which declines with age anyway, in everybody. So you've got those three key hormones, and they're crucial for overall health. Estrogen is so important, but we can't replace those with food. But what you can do, if you really look after yourself with good nutrition, with good lifestyle habits, and a positive mindset, and then if you feel that hormone replacement therapy is right for you and that fits in with your health and everything, then what I say to my clients is get the whole picture, get all the knowledge in front of you, and then it's up to you. It's your decision. There is many benefits to taking hormone replacement therapy if that suits you. But once you've got everything there, then you can decide. But you can't just do one of those pieces. If you take hormone replacement therapy but have a terrible diet and don't exercise and smoke and drink, you're still going to feel terrible. You've got to work on all the different pillars really to get the maximum benefit.
Is there anything else sort of around the sort of nutritional and lifestyle side of the menopause that you want to sort of pass on?
There's two key. I mean, there's many, many things that you can do, but the two key things really that will make you start feeling better the quickest is stress management and keep balancing your blood sugar. Really thinking about your food choices and keeping the blood sugar balance. So, because basically, when you eat refined carbohydrates that shoot your blood sugar up, you get into this kind of roller coaster effect of having high blood sugar. Your body then secretes a hormone called insulin, which really helps to take care of the blood sugar. It gets rid of the sugar, it opens up the cells and allows the cells to use that sugar. But once it does that, the blood sugar crashes again. And that's when you start craving sweet things again. So then you eat a muffin or whatever it is, and then your blood sugar crashes. So you get into this roller coaster, hot flashes, mood swings, weight gain. Insulin is a key hormone. And as we go into menopause, we can become less sensitive to insulin. So that means your body doesn't take care of the blood sugar levels like it should. And, that just leads on to an array of other symptoms. So really just thinking about what you eat protein is key. A palm size of protein with every meal is really important for women as well, for women in general, but especially as we get older. And then having your healthy fats, avocado, olive oil, nuts and seeds, and then having your carbohydrates, but getting your carbohydrates from vegetables, green vegetable carbohydrates. You don't actually need to have bread and lots of potatoes and everything with your meal. It's better to get your carbohydrates from vegetables, and that really helps to keep your blood sugar on balance. And if you eating rice and things like that, always buy whole grain, because they're much better for your digestion and don't spike your blood sugar as much. So blood sugar is key. And then the second thing is stress management, and stress is so detrimental for a menopausal woman. And it's because of all the things that happen, that the hormones that are released when we're chronically stressed, it just cascades into this, lack of sleep, weight gain, cravings. It's really, and I think stress management is something that we all tend to think, oh, like, well, I can't, I'm so busy. How am I ever going to be able to do, manage my stress? But you really have to. You have to give yourself that time to manage your stress. Otherwise, you're going to get to a point where, you're maybe not going to be able to work, or you're going to be feeling so terrible. Just little things that you can do. Just something as simple as deep breathing if you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed.
Alongside the menopause, you've got a lot of other potential life changes happening as well. If you're, like, say, your children are growing up and there's issues related to to all of that, teenagers and so on and so forth, and then they might leave home, and then that can be quite challenging, I think, and it cause women to sort of reconsider what it is that they're doing, and with their life, and that can be just a very stressful period of life regardless of the menopause, really. So yeah,
you just have to put yourself first. And I always say, we've all got this never-ending to-do list, haven't we? But your to-do list is never going to be done. You can't say, oh, I'll start doing stress management, I'll do that when I've done this to-do list, but it's never going to be finished, is it? Because there's always new things you're adding to it. So take 5-10 minutes a day, if that's all the time you've got, to just go and do something that you enjoy, or just sitting peacefully by a window drinking a cup of tea. Go and sit outside, go for a walk. So important for our overall health, really. And it's okay to look after yourself. I think we tend to sometimes feel guilty, don't we?
So my last question, you can go and have a little bit of me time yourself. Just tell me quickly, what's on your dinner table tonight?
That's actually interesting you asked that, because I made it earlier because I knew I wouldn't have time tonight. I made a meatloaf. So with the, and it was, I actually made with lots of herbs. I love her. I grow herbs out in the garden. So like minced lamb, all mixed up with an egg in there, and then thyme and rosemary, salt and pepper. Yeah, that was it. So I'm going to have that, and then I'm going to have some broccoli. Huge fan of all the broccoli. That's another wonderful vegetable for women, because it really helps to your digestion and getting rid of all the hormones that you should excrete through your body. So all of those sort of vegetables are wonderful for menopausal women. And broccoli, and what else am I having with that? Maybe some beans, some runner beans.
That sounds good. My mum used to make meatloaf when we were growing up, actually. Great. Well, that is wonderful. It's been really interesting talking to you.
Yeah, it's been lovely, Lynn. Really interesting conversation. Actually, very nice to think back about what you ate when you were a child.
Thank you so much for being on the What's for Dinner show. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. Before I go, just a little reminder that if you enjoyed the show, please tell your friends. You can share an episode from your podcast player or from my website, or you can easily share one of my social media posts on Instagram or Facebook. If you're kind enough to share an episode, I'll give you a personal shout out on the show to say thank you. What more could you ask for? Thanks in advance for helping me spread the word about my podcast. Thank you to Rick Simmons from the Content Podcast for his help and advice, and thank you to Pixel Bay for the music.